The explosion turned the world into a storm of fire and shattered concrete. One moment, the oil refinery was a skeletal maze of rust and shadow, a monument to wars long past. The next, it was hell incarnate. The RPG screamed out of the darkness, a comet of malice that impacted the Western Wall with a sound that wasn't just heard, but felt. A pressure wave that compressed lungs and rattled teeth. Ilara Cross was airborne before she understood why. The blast wave caught her mid-stride, lifting her slight frame and hurling her against a corrugated metal panel that had once been part of a storage tank. The impact drove the air from her lungs in a single, violent exhalation. Shrapnel, a twisted piece of rebar, jagged and hot, punched through her left shoulder just above the collarbone. It was a white-hot spike of agony that radiated down her arm and up into her jaw. She did not scream. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her breath came in short, controlled sips through her nose. Her eyes, gray as winter fog, remained open and focused. The only sound she made was the faint scrape of her boots against gravel as she dragged herself behind the relative safety of a collapsed pipeline. Around her, the night erupted into chaos. "Contact! Contact left!" The voice belonged to Captain Dalton Reeves, the SEAL team leader. His words were sharp, clipped, a knife cutting through the din. Muzzle flashes strobed from 3 positions simultaneously: rooftops, second-story windows, the skeletal framework of a gutted control room. The enemy had chosen their ground with care. This was an ambush, methodical and patient. "Packages down! I repeat, packages down!" Another voice, younger, edged with adrenaline. That was Garrett Vale, the team medic. Through the haze of dust and cordite, Ilara saw him moving toward her position, his movements fluid despite the 70 pounds of gear strapped to his frame. To them, she was cargo, a liability wrapped in a cover story. Intelligence analyst, they'd been told. Signals specialist. Civilian contractor with language skills and a security clearance. The kind of asset you extract from bad places when the shooting starts, not the kind you rely on when the bullets are flying. Garrett reached her in seconds, his tactical gloves already reaching for the drag handle on her vest. He hauled her deeper into cover with professional efficiency, his rifle swinging on its sling as he transitioned to medical mode. "Ma'am, I need to assess." He stopped mid-sentence. The wound in her shoulder was catastrophic. The rebar had gone deep, possibly nicking the subclavian artery. Blood soaked through her shirt in an expanding dark stain, black in the dim light. By every metric of pain and trauma, she should be screaming, thrashing, going into shock. Instead, she was cataloging her own injury with the detached precision of a field surgeon. "Shrapnel," she said, her voice low and steady. "Deep penetration near the clavicle. Artery intact for now, mobility compromised." Her free hand was already applying pressure to a specific point just below the wound, a technique designed to slow venous bleeding without cutting off arterial flow. Garrett's eyes widened behind his ballistic glasses. Civilians didn't do that. Civilians didn't use medical terminology while impaled with shrapnel. Civilians didn't lie in pools of their own blood with the eerie calm of a seasoned operator. "Who the hell are you?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Ilara's gaze shifted past him, scanning the rooftops with mechanical precision. Her pupils tracked movement in the darkness that he couldn't yet see. "Rooftop, 11 o'clock, 3rd floor, red brick section. Sniper." Garrett froze. Then his training kicked in. He keyed his radio without taking his eyes off her. "Actual, possible sniper, 11 o'clock, 3rd story, red structure." 2 seconds later, the heavy bark of a marksman rifle answered from somewhere behind them. A cascade of bricks exploded from the target location. A distant shout, cut short. Garrett turned back to Ilara. She was still staring at him with those unsettling gray eyes, her expression betraying nothing. No triumph, no relief, just the flat, professional acknowledgement of a tactical problem solved. He pulled out his trauma shears. This is going to hurt. She simply waited. As he cut away the fabric of her jacket and shirt, she didn't flinch. Her breathing remained steady, that same practiced rhythm, as if she'd learned long ago how to partition her mind from her body. He exposed the wound, ugly, a crater of torn muscle and tissue, and began to irrigate it with saline. That's when he saw the others. Scars. Not the kind you get from kitchen accidents or childhood mishaps. These were the roadmap of violence, written in scar tissue across her skin. Near her collarbone, a thin, white line, surgically precise. Lower on her ribs, the unmistakable pucker of a bullet wound. Entry. His eyes followed the trajectory. On her back, partially visible as she lay on her side, the larger, more ragged star of an exit wound. Old wounds, fully healed, professional work. His hands slowed, his mind racing. He'd read her file, twice. Ilara Cross, 28, American, doctorate in linguistics from Georgetown, contractor for the Defense Intelligence Agency, specialized in Levantine Arabic and Russian, divorced, no children. A photograph of a woman with blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wire-rimmed glasses perched on a delicate nose. Nothing in those sanitized pages explained gunshot wounds. Nothing explained the faint cross-hatching on her forearm, defensive knife scars. Nothing explained the way she'd called out that sniper position with the casual accuracy of someone who'd spent years reading battlefields. Garrett worked in silence, packing the wound with gauze, his knuckles brushing against other scars he couldn't fully see. Burn marks. A long, deliberate surgical scar along her lower ribs, each one a chapter in a story her file had deliberately omitted. He secured the final bandage, his movements automatic while his brain tried to process the contradictions. Done, he said quietly. Bleeding's controlled. No major arterial damage, but you've lost a lot of blood. You need to rest. Ilara's eyes opened. They held his for a long moment, and in that gaze he saw something that made his spine straighten. Depth, experience, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen things and done things that left permanent marks. She gave a single, deliberate nod. Not gratitude, acknowledgement. Then she closed her eyes again, her hand moving beneath her jacket to clutch something in her pocket. A small object, smooth and familiar. Her breathing evened out, but Garrett knew she wasn't sleeping. She was somewhere else, somewhere far away. He sat back on his heels, his medical pack forgotten, staring at the woman who was supposed to be a simple extraction package. The biggest threat in special operations wasn't always the enemy you could see. It was the unknown, the variable that didn't match the intelligence brief. Ilara Cross was now a walking, breathing unknown. And Garrett had a sinking feeling that everything they'd been told about this mission was a lie. The briefing room at Fort Bragg smelled of stale coffee and floor wax 3 days earlier. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of 6 men seated around a scarred conference table. These were the operators of SEAL Team 7, Alpha Platoon, hard men with hard eyes, their bodies honed by years of combat deployments and training that never stopped. Captain Dalton Reeves stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his jaw working as he studied the mission brief on the screen behind him. At 40, he was the old man of the team, his brown hair threaded with gray at the temples, his face weathered by sun and sand and too many close calls. He'd been doing this for 18 years. He knew the difference between a straightforward op and one that smelled wrong. This one reeked. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice carrying the flat drawl of East Texas. "We're inserting into an active conflict zone to extract a civilian contractor. A linguist." He let the word hang in the air like an accusation. The briefing officer, a Navy lieutenant commander with a chest full of ribbons and no combat deployments, cleared his throat. "That's correct, Captain. The asset is currently embedded with a CIA team operating near the Syrian border. Intel suggests her position has been compromised. Extraction window is 48 hours. And we're pulling her out because..." This came from Tyler, the team's point man, a wiry Californian with a perpetual squint. Because she's read into programs above your clearance level, petty officer. That's all you need to know. Dalton's eyes narrowed. Who else is after her? Russian-backed mercenaries, possibly Wagner Group remnants. The region is complicated. It's always complicated. Dalton turned to the screen, studying the grainy satellite image of their target. A compound in the desert, Syrian side of the border. Old Soviet construction, repurposed by whoever currently controlled the dirt around it. Rules of engagement? Minimize civilian casualties, secure the asset, exfiltrate to the rally point. Overwatch will be provided by... The door to the briefing room opened. Every head turned. The man who entered moved slowly, deliberately, the hydraulic whir of his wheelchair the only sound in the suddenly silent room. He was in his 60s, his frame still broad through the shoulders despite the years and the injury. His face was all angles and hard lines, his eyes the pale blue of Arctic ice. A pair of eagles adorned his collar, full bird colonel, but it was the wheelchair that drew the eye, and the space where his left leg should have been, ending mid-thigh. Gentlemen, the colonel said, his voice like gravel shifting in a river. I'm Colonel James Brennan. I'll be overseeing this operation from TOC. Dalton straightened. He knew the name. Everyone in the special operations community knew the name. Brennan was a legend, one of the Marine Corps' top scout snipers, before an injury in Beirut had ended his career in the field. He'd spent the last 2 decades in various training and advisory roles, shaping the next generation of warriors. Sir, Dalton said, nodding respect. Brennan's eyes swept the room, assessing each man with the clinical precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime evaluating fighters. The asset you're extracting is named Ilara Cross. 28 years old, 5'4", 120 pounds. She speaks 8 languages fluently and has advanced degrees in linguistics and Middle Eastern studies. Tyler snorted. Sounds like dead weight, sir. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Brennan's gaze fixed on Tyler with the intensity of a laser sight. That dead weight, petty officer, has more operational experience in denied areas than your entire fire team combined. She's been in country for 6 months, operating under non-official cover, developing intelligence sources that have prevented 3 major attacks on coalition forces. Silence. With respect, sir, Dalton said carefully, her file says civilian contractor, not operator. Her file, Brennan said slowly, says what it needs to say to protect a very expensive and very effective intelligence asset. What I'm telling you is that if the shooting starts, don't assume she'll be a liability. She knows how to handle herself. Garrett the medic spoke up. Sir, if she's that valuable, why not send in a full extraction team? Why are we running this light? A ghost of a smile crossed Brennan's face. Because loud attracts attention, and because the people looking for her are expecting a hammer. You're going to be a scalpel. He paused, his expression hardening. There's one more thing you need to know. The intelligence suggests that the man coordinating the search for Miss Cross is someone I know. Someone I've been looking for 40 years. He reached down and pulled a thin folder from a pouch on his wheelchair, sliding it across the table. Dalton opened it. The photograph inside showed a man in his 50s, lean and predatory, with a scar that ran from his left eye to his jawline. The file beneath identified him as Viktor Volkov, former KGB, currently believed to be operating as a military advisor and arms dealer in the region. This man, Brennan said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, killed my partner in Beirut, 1984. He cost me my leg, and he's been a ghost ever since. If he's involved in this, it's not about intelligence. It's personal. Dalton studied the photograph, then looked up at the colonel. Sir, if this is personal, it's always personal, Captain. But I'm not asking you to settle my debts. I'm asking you to bring Ilara Cross home alive. Everything else is secondary. The briefing officer cleared his throat. The asset will be waiting for extraction at the primary rally point. Your window opens at 2100 hours local time. The plan is straightforward. The door opened again. This time, the figure who entered was small, slight, almost fragile in appearance. Blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, wire-rimmed glasses, a simple button-down shirt and khaki pants. She carried a worn leather satchel over one shoulder and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone trying not to take up too much space. Every seal in the room sized her up in seconds. Small, soft hands, no visible muscle definition. The kind of person you'd see teaching at a university, not operating in a war zone. Tyler leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. "You've got to be kidding me." Brennan's voice cracked like a whip. "Petty officer, you will show respect or you will be removed from this briefing." "Clear?" "Crystal, sir." The woman, Ilara Cross, walked to the front of the room without looking at any of them. She set her satchel on the table and pulled out a tablet, syncing it to the screen behind her. A map appeared, detailed and annotated in what looked like Russian and Arabic. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "The compound where I'll be waiting is here." She highlighted a location with her finger. "It's an old Soviet listening post, abandoned in the 90s, reoccupied by various groups since then. Current occupants are local militia with ties to Russian advisors. They have 3 heavy machine gun positions, here, here, and here. Rooftop access is limited to 2 points. The perimeter is ringed with improvised obstacles, mostly vehicle hulks and concertina wire." She zoomed in on the structure. "The building interior is 3 stories. Ground floor is mostly open, used to be vehicle storage. Second floor is where they keep prisoners and supplies. Third floor is observation and comms. If they're holding anyone, it'll be second floor, northeast corner room. That's the most defensible position with the best sight lines for security." Dalton leaned forward. "How do you know their defensive setup?" Ilara turned to look at him for the first time. Those gray eyes met his without flinching. "Because I've been inside. Twice. Once to establish a source, once to service a dead drop. They don't know I was there." Tyler's smirk had faded. "You're telling us you walked into a hostile compound, twice, alone?" "Yes." "Bullshit." Brennan's hand hit the table with a crack that made everyone jump. "That is enough." He rolled his chair forward until he was beside Ilara, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "Miss Cross has risked her life more times in the last 6 months than most of you have in your entire careers. She has developed intelligence that saved American lives. She has operated in denied territory without backup, without support, without the comfort of knowing that if things go wrong, someone is coming to pull her out." He looked around the room. "You will treat her with the respect she has earned, or you will be off this team. I don't care how many deployments you have. I don't care what schools you've been to. She is an operator, and she will be treated as such. Am I understood?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," echoed through the room. Ilara hadn't moved. Her expression remained neutral, neither offended by Tyler's comment nor gratified by Brennan's defense. She simply waited. Dalton studied her more carefully now, the way she stood, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits, assessing threats, measuring distances. These weren't the habits of an academic. "Miss Cross," he said slowly, "with respect, your file says you're a linguist, but you're talking like someone with tactical training." She met his gaze. "I have a doctorate in linguistics from Georgetown. I also have other training that isn't in my file." "What kind of training?" Brennan cut in. "The kind that's classified above your pay grade, Captain. But I will tell you this. Ilara Cross is the best intelligence operative I've ever worked with. She's also the student I've been training for 6 years to finish a mission I started 40 years ago." The room went very still. Garrett spoke quietly. "Sir, this sounds like it's not just an extraction." Brennan's smile was cold and sharp. "No, Doc, it's not just an extraction. But that's what you're going to do. You're going to bring her home. And if Volkov gets in your way, you're going to remove the obstacle. But make no mistake, Ilara Cross is your primary objective. Everything else is secondary. He turned to Ilara. Show them. She hesitated for just a moment, then reached up and unbuttoned the top two buttons of her shirt. The room's atmosphere shifted, uncomfortable, until she pulled the collar aside to reveal her left shoulder. A scar. Thick, raised, the kind that comes from severe burns. Mogadishu, 2019, she said quietly. Improvised explosive device. I was working with a State Department team on refugee processing. She turned slightly, showing another scar, this one a neat line across her collarbone. Yemen, 2021, shrapnel from a mortar round. She buttoned her shirt again. I have 12 more, each one from a place that's not in my official file, each one from a mission that never happened, in a country I was never in, doing work that doesn't exist. The SEALs stared. So when you look at me and see someone who can't handle herself, Ilara continued, her voice still quiet but now edged with something harder. Remember that I've already survived things you've only read about in after-action reports. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to do your job and get me to the rally point. I'll take care of myself. Dalton found himself reassessing everything. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the scars. What else should we know? He asked. Ilara's eyes shifted to Brennan, a silent question. The colonel gave a slight nod. Viktor Volkov, she said, pulling up a new image on the screen, is not just a former KGB officer. He's a specialist in what the Russians called active measures, psychological operations, assassinations, deep cover infiltration. After the Soviet Union collapsed, he went private. He's been linked to arms deals, regime changes, and at least a dozen high-profile killings. He's also one of the best tactical minds in the business. She zoomed in on a satellite image of the border region. 3 days ago, we intercepted communications suggesting he's taken personal command of the search for me. That's unusual. Men like Volkov don't involve themselves in field operations unless it's personal. Why would it be personal? Tyler asked, the challenge gone from his voice. Ilara glanced at Brennan again. The colonel's face was stone. Because, Brennan said slowly, he knows that I'm the one who's been running her. And he knows that the last time we met, I tried to kill him. The room absorbed this information in silence. Beirut, Dalton said, 1984. You said he killed your partner. Sergeant Marcus Davis, best spotter I ever worked with. We were on Overwatch, protecting the Marine barracks. Volkov was coordinating with Hezbollah militants, providing technical support for the truck bombing that killed 241 Marines. We had eyes on him, had a clear shot. Brennan's hands tightened on the arms of his wheelchair. I hesitated. There was a civilian truck in the area. I couldn't confirm it wasn't a threat. By the time I made the call to take the shot, Volkov's counter-sniper had already acquired us. 1 round. Davis was dead before he hit the ground. The second round caught me in the leg. I spent 6 hours bleeding out before our team could extract. And Volkov got away, Ilara said softly. And Volkov got away, Brennan echoed. I've been tracking him ever since. 40 years. And now he's making a move in my backyard, going after someone under my protection. He rolled his chair back, his eyes sweeping the room. So yes, gentlemen, this is personal, but your mission parameters remain unchanged. Extract the asset. If you encounter Volkov or his people, you engage only if necessary to protect the package. You are not, I repeat, you are not to go hunting for him. Clear? Yes, sir. Brennan looked at Ilara. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. A shared history, a shared purpose. Wheels up at 0600, the briefing officer said. Full kit, winter desert loadout. Any questions? Dalton had 1,000 questions, but the clock was ticking and the mission was clear enough. Get in, get the asset, get out. The rest would sort itself in the field. It always did. As the team filed out, Garrett paused beside Alara. "Miss Cross, for what it's worth, I've worked with a lot of people in bad places. You don't get scars like that by being careless. If the Colonel trusts you, that's good enough for me." Ilara looked at him, and for just a moment, her carefully controlled expression softened. "Thank you, Doc, and please, call me Ilara." "Garrett," he extended his hand. She shook it, her grip firm despite her slight frame. As he left, Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just shaken hands with a ghost. Someone who was already dead, just hadn't stopped moving yet. Back at the Syrian refinery, the firefight had settled into an uneasy quiet. The enemy had pulled back, regrouping, testing the SEAL team's perimeter with probing shots that cracked through the darkness every few minutes. Dalton had his men in a defensive semicircle, overlapping fields of fire, night vision painting the world in shades of green. Ilara lay where Garrett had left her, eyes closed, breathing steady. But she wasn't resting, she was listening. The way the enemy moved, the discipline of their fire, the careful, methodical way they were tightening the noose. This wasn't militia. This was professional military, contractor grade. This was Volkov. She could feel him out there in the darkness, a presence as familiar as her own heartbeat. She'd studied his patterns for 6 years, learned to think like him, predict his moves. And right now, every instinct she'd honed was screaming that this wasn't just an ambush. This was a trap, and they were already in it. Her hand tightened around the object in her pocket. A small piece of metal, worn smooth by years of handling. A bird of prey, carved from a spent rifle casing. Brennan had given it to her after her first live-fire mission. "Every hunter needs a totem," he'd said, "something to remind her what she is." She tried to bury that part of herself, tried to become just Ilara Cross, the linguist, the academic, the person who lived in words instead of violence. But the scars on her body told a different story. And tonight, in this burning refinery in the middle of nowhere, that story was about to be written in blood. The abandoned Soviet bunker smelled of rust and forgotten wars. It was a relic from the Cold War, one of dozens scattered across this region like tombstones marking the grave of an empire. Concrete walls 3 feet thick, designed to withstand artillery bombardment, a labyrinth of chambers and corridors that had once housed soldiers who believed they were building the future. Now it was just another shell, hollowed out by time and scavengers. But tonight, it was sanctuary. Dalton had found it on the map during their planning phase, marked it as a contingency position. Old Soviet infrastructure was predictable, built to a standard, documented in manuals that intelligence agencies had been collecting for decades. If you knew where to look, you could find these places. And if you knew how to read them, you could use them. The SEAL team had moved through the darkness like shadows, carrying Ilara between them. She hadn't complained, hadn't made a sound even when the movement jarred her wounded shoulder. Garrett had given her morphine, enough to take the edge off, but not enough to cloud her judgment. She'd accepted it with a nod, her gray eyes never losing focus. Now they were 3 levels underground in what had once been a command center. The air was thick and stale, tasting of earth and concrete. Emergency chemical lights cast everything in a sickly green glow. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a metronome counting down the seconds until the enemy found them. Because they would find them, that was never in question. The only question was how much time they had to prepare. Dalton posted sentries at the 2 access points, positioned Tyler at the main entrance with the squad automatic weapon, and set up a casualty collection point in the deepest chamber. Then he pulled out his map and tried to figure out how to get 6 operators and 1 wounded civilian through 15 kilometers of hostile territory to the extraction point. The math wasn't good. Garrett worked in the corner, his aid bag spread out like a surgeon's instrument tray. He'd already treated 2 men for minor shrapnel wounds and exhaustion. Now he was inventorying what remained. Combat gauze, tourniquets, pressure bandages, Morphine syrettes, saline, antibiotics. Not enough. Never enough. He glanced at Alara. She sat with her back against the wall, her wounded shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages, her good hand resting on her thigh. Her eyes were open but distant, seeing something that wasn't in this bunker, something far away. He'd seen that look before, on men coming back from bad places, carrying ghosts they couldn't outrun. He finished his inventory and walked over to her, his boots scraping on the concrete. "How's the pain?" "Manageable." Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw past the careful control to the exhaustion beneath. "It hurts, but I've had worse." I saw. He sat down beside her, his back against the same wall. "Those scars. That's not training accidents and bad luck. That's a career." Ilara didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be weighing something, deciding how much truth to offer. Finally, she said, "How many scars do you have, Doc?" The question caught him off guard. "A few. Fallujah, 2016. Helmand Province, 2018. A couple of training mishaps that were more stupidity than valor." "Tell me about one." Garrett thought back, sorting through the catalog of near misses and close calls. "Okay, Fallujah. We were clearing a building, third floor. I was trailing the stack, providing medical support. The point man triggered an IED, homemade, pressure plate, just enough explosive to kill whoever stepped on it." He paused, the memory sharp and clear despite the years. "The blast threw me back through a doorway. Shrapnel caught me across the ribs left side. Felt like getting hit with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. I remember lying there, trying to breathe, watching the dust settle. And all I could think was how stupid it was. We'd cleared that hallway twice, and we still missed it." "Did you freeze?" "No, I got up. Treated the point man. He'd lost his foot. Kept him alive until we could get him to the bird. Then I passed out from blood loss." He lifted his shirt, showing her a jagged line of scar tissue that ran from his sternum to his hip. 14 inches, 43 stitches. "The surgeon told me I was lucky it didn't open my peritoneum." Ilara studied the scar with professional interest. "Clean work. Military hospital?" "Balad. Best trauma surgeons in the world, working out of a tent in the desert." He lowered his shirt. "Your turn. Pick one." She hesitated again, then reached up and touched her collarbone where the burn scar disappeared beneath her shirt. "This one. Mogadishu, 2019. I was embedded with a State Department team, officially doing translation work for refugee processing. Unofficially, I was running sources, trying to map the Al-Shabaab network in the southern districts." Her voice remained steady, clinical, as if she were describing someone else's story. "We were meeting a contact in the Bakara market. Crowded, loud, good place to get lost. He was late. That should have been my first warning, but I was young and stupid and thought I was clever enough to control the situation." "How young?" 23. Fresh out of graduate school, fresh out of training, fresh out of my mind with the certainty that I knew better than anyone else." A bitter smile crossed her lips. The contact never showed. Instead, a man with a vest full of ball bearings walked into the cafe where I was waiting. Garrett felt his stomach tighten. He'd seen suicide bombings. He knew what came next. I had maybe 2 seconds of warning, saw his hand move toward the trigger. I dove for the door. The blast caught me midair, threw me through the front window. When I woke up, I was on fire. My jacket, my hair, the whole left side of my body felt like it was being dipped in acid. She touched the scar again, her fingers tracing its outline. "A Somali woman put me out, rolled me in the dirt, beat the flames with her hands. She didn't know me, didn't care that I was American or that I probably shouldn't have been there. She just saw someone burning and decided to help." "How many dead?" 17, including 3 children. Ilara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The target was a local militia commander who met there every week. Al-Shabaab had been watching him. I was just collateral damage. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of those 17 lives hanging between them. I spent 3 months in a burn unit in Germany, Ilara continued. Physical therapy, skin grafts, psychological evaluation. They wanted to send me home, medical discharge, full pension. Thank you for your service, now please disappear and never talk about what happened. But you didn't. No. I went back to work. Different cover, different posting, same job. Because sitting in some suburban house trying to pretend I was normal felt like dying slowly. At least in the field, I knew who I was. Garrett understood that. He'd seen men try to go back to civilian life, try to fit into a world that didn't have room for what they'd become. Most of them failed. The lucky ones found their way back to the work. The unlucky ones ate their guns. How many scars total? He asked. Ilara looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, something like vulnerability flickered across her face. 12, not counting the small ones. 12 that mark moments when I should have died but didn't. 12. Garrett absorbed this. That's a lot of weight to carry. It is. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, a gesture that seemed more about comfort than cold. You ask me who I am, back in the refinery. The truth is, I'm not entirely sure anymore. My file says one thing, my scars say another. And somewhere in between is whatever's left of the person I used to be. Before Garrett could respond, Dalton appeared in the doorway, his face grim. We've got company. Drones, small ones, quadcopters, probably commercial grade but modified. They're doing a search pattern, working their way through the industrial district. How long until they find us? 2 hours, maybe 3 if we're lucky. He looked at Ilara. They're not giving up. Whoever's running this operation, they want you bad. Ilara's expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing behind the mask of control. It's Volkov. He's not going to stop until he has me or confirms I'm dead. Why? What makes you worth this much effort? She glanced at Garrett, then back to Dalton. Because I know something that can destroy him, and because Colonel Brennan trained me specifically to be the weapon that ends him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Dalton's jaw tightened. Explain. Ilara stood, wincing as the movement pulled at her wounded shoulder. She walked to where Dalton had spread his map, studying the terrain features marked in precise military notation. 6 years ago, I tried to kill myself. The words dropped like stones into still water. I was in a dark place. PTSD, survivor's guilt, a dozen other diagnoses that the psychiatrist threw at me. I'd lost my team in Crimea. Black op, deep cover, the kind of mission that never happened. 7 operators went in. I came out alone, and I couldn't live with that. She traced a line on the map, her fingers steady despite the subject matter. Brennan found me in the barracks bathroom, bleeding out from cuts I'd made with a field knife. He saved my life, and then he gave me a reason to keep living. Volkov, Garrett said quietly. Volkov. Ilara nodded. Brennan told me about Beirut, about Davis, about 40 years of hunting a ghost who kept slipping away. And he offered me a choice, spend the rest of my life running from my demons, or turn those demons into a weapon and aim it at something that deserved to die. Dalton studied her with new eyes. He trained you to kill Volkov. He trained me to be better than Volkov, faster, smarter, more patient. He taught me everything Davis taught him: advanced marksmanship, close quarters combat, tactical psychology, infiltration techniques. But more than that, he taught me how to think like a hunter, how to read terrain, predict behavior, turn an enemy's strengths into weaknesses. She looked up at Dalton. For 6 years, we've been building a trap. I went into the field, developed sources, collected intelligence, always moving closer to Volkov's network. And 3 months ago, we finally had him. Location confirmed, Patterns established, vulnerabilities mapped. The mission you're on right now, the extraction, it was supposed to be the endgame. What changed? He figured it out. Someone in his organization must have noticed the pattern, connected the dots. 2 weeks ago, he went dark, shut down his normal communications, moved his operation, purged his staff, and then he resurfaced here, hunting for me. Dalton's mind raced through the implications. He knows Brennan's running you. Worse, he knows Brennan wants him dead, and he's turned the tables. Now, instead of walking into our trap, he's set one of his own. He's using me as bait to draw Brennan out. Brennan's at Fort Bragg. He's not coming. Ilara's smile was sad and knowing. You don't know the colonel like I do. Volkov killed his partner, took his leg, spent 40 years being the one that got away. If Volkov has me cornered, Brennan will move heaven and earth to finish what he started, even if it means putting himself in the crosshairs. The bunker suddenly felt much smaller, the walls pressing in. Dalton had walked into operations with bad intelligence before, but this was something else. This was personal vendetta wrapped in geopolitics. 40 years of hate compressed into a single point of violence. And his team was caught in the middle. How do we get out of this? He asked. Ilara turned to face him fully. We stop running. We stop reacting. We become the hunters instead of the hunted. With one wounded civilian and 6 operators running low on ammunition and medical supplies? With one operator who knows Volkov better than anyone alive, and 6 of the most dangerous men on the planet who are too stubborn to die. She met his gaze without flinching. Captain, you've been treating me like cargo. I understand why, but that ends now. If you want to survive this, you need to start treating me like what I am. And what's that? The only person in this bunker who can get us all out alive. At Fort Bragg, Colonel James Brennan sat in his wheelchair and watched satellite feeds of the Syrian border scroll across multiple screens. His hands rested on the arms of his chair, fingers drumming a slow, steady rhythm. Beside him, a CIA liaison officer named Patterson shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we're showing increased activity in your team's sector. Looks like a coordinated search pattern, at least 40 hostiles, possibly more. I see it. Extraction is going to be complicated. We might need to move up the timeline, bring in additional assets. No. Brennan's voice was flat, absolute. We maintain the current plan. Sir, with respect, if Volkov has deployed that many men, your team is going to be outnumbered 6-1. Maybe worse. They need support. Brennan's eyes never left the screens. They have support. They have Ilara Cross, and they have orders to get her to the rally point. Everything else is noise. Patterson fell silent, but Brennan could feel the man's disapproval radiating like heat. The CIA didn't understand this kind of operation. They thought in terms of assets and calculations, risk-reward matrices that reduced human lives to numbers on a spreadsheet. They didn't understand that some debts could only be paid in blood. 40 years ago, Marcus Davis had died because Brennan hesitated. One moment of doubt, one instant of weighing civilian lives against the mission, and his best friend's head had exploded in a pink mist that painted the rooftop red. Brennan had spent every day since that moment learning to live with the guilt, learning to function despite the phantom pain in his missing leg, despite the nightmares that still jerked him awake at 3 a.m, learning to turn his failure into something useful. And Ilara Cross was that usefulness made flesh. He'd found her at her lowest point, bleeding out on a bathroom floor, her eyes already going glassy with shock. He'd wrapped her wrists with compression bandages torn from his own shirt, called for help, stayed with her while the medics worked. And when she finally woke up in the hospital, he'd been there. You tried to quit, he'd told her. I understand. I tried to quit too, after Beirut. But you know what I learned? You don't get to quit. The war doesn't care about your pain. It just keeps going. The only choice you have is whether you let it destroy you or whether you destroy it first. She'd stared at him with those gray eyes, empty and hollow. I got my team killed. I got my partner killed. We're even. How do you live with it? You don't. You carry it every day, and you use it. You turn it into fuel. You find the people who deserve your rage, and you make them pay for every drop of blood you've spilled, for every friend you've buried, for every piece of yourself you've lost. He'd shown her the photograph then. Viktor Volkov, the man who'd haunted his dreams for 40 years. I can't kill him myself, Brennan had said. Not anymore. My body won't let me. But I can build the weapon that does. I can train someone to be better than I was. Faster, smarter, without my weaknesses. Ilara had looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she'd said, "Teach me." And he had. 6 years of turning broken into deadly. 6 years of taking a linguist with a death wish and forging her into something that could walk through the shadows and emerge with blood on her hands. He taught her everything: marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, infiltration, exfiltration, dead drops, brush passes, the 1,000 tiny skills that separated professionals from amateurs. But more importantly, he taught her to think like Davis had taught him, to see patterns in chaos, to read terrain like a language, to understand that every enemy had a rhythm, a pattern of behavior, and if you watched long enough, patient enough, you could predict their next move. And now, watching the satellite feeds, Brennan could see Volkov's rhythm clear as day. The search pattern was too methodical, too precise. Volkov knew where Ilara was, or at least knew where she wasn't. He was boxing her in, limiting her options, forcing her toward a predetermined point. The old Soviet bunker. Of course. Volkov had operated in this region during the Cold War. He knew the infrastructure, knew what a desperate team would look for. He was hurting them, pushing them into a position where he could control the engagement. Brennan's fingers stopped drumming. He leaned forward, studying the map with renewed intensity. If Volkov was pushing them toward the bunker, that meant he had something planned there. A trap, an ambush, something that would let him capture Ilara alive, because she was only valuable if he could interrogate her, find out how much Brennan knew, how deep the penetration went. But Volkov was making the same mistake he'd made in Beirut. He was assuming his enemy would react predictably. Brennan reached for the secure communications console. "Get me Captain Reeves, priority channel." Back in the bunker, Dalton's radio crackled to life. "Bravo 7 actual, this is Ironside. You copy?" Dalton keyed his mic. "Ironside, this is actual. Go ahead." "I need you to listen very carefully, Captain. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but if you want to get your team home alive, you're going to have to trust me." "I'm listening, sir." "You're in a trap. Volkov knows where you are. He's been pushing you toward that bunker since the initial contact. He wants you there because he can control the approaches, limit your movement, force you to defend instead of maneuver." Dalton felt his blood turn cold. "Recommendations, sir?" "You're going to do the last thing he expects. You're going to give Ilara Cross operational command of your team." Silence on the line. Dalton looked at Ilara, who was watching him with those steady gray eyes, waiting. "Sir," Dalton said carefully, "she's a civilian contractor. I can't—" "She's not a civilian. She's a Tier 1 operator with 6 years of specialized training and more experience in denied areas than your entire platoon combined. Her cover was civilian contractor. Her reality is something else entirely. And right now, she's the only person in that bunker who can think the way Volkov thinks." "Sir," "Captain," Brennan's voice hardened. "I know what I'm asking. I know it goes against your training, your instincts, everything you've been taught about chain of command. But I've been hunting Viktor Volkov for 40 years. I know how he operates. I know his patterns. And I know that if you try to fight your way out of this the way you're trained to fight, you'll be dead in 6 hours." Dalton looked around the bunker. His men were watching him, waiting for orders. They were good men, hard men, professionals who'd been through hell and come out the other side. They trusted him to make the right call. "What's the plan, sir?" "Put Alara on." Dalton handed the radio to Alara. She took it without hesitation, her movements fluid despite her injury. "I'm here, Colonel." "How's the shoulder?" "Functional." "Good, because I need you to do something for me. I need you to stop being the package and start being the operator I trained you to be. Can you do that?" Ilara closed her eyes for a moment, and Garrett saw something shift in her expression. The careful control, the civilian mask, it all fell away. What was left was harder, sharper, a blade honed to a killing edge. When she opened her eyes again, they were different, colder, more focused. "Yes, sir." "Volkov is pushing you toward a confrontation. He wants to capture you alive, use you to get to me. He thinks he's controlling the board. I need you to show him he's wrong." "How?" "By doing what you do best. By reading the terrain, finding the weakness in his plan, and exploiting it before he knows what hit him. I've taught you everything I know. Now I need you to be better than I ever was." Ilara looked at Dalton, then at the map spread across the floor. Her mind was already working, processing variables, calculating possibilities. "I'll need full tactical authority," she said. "You have it. Captain Reeves will defer to your judgment on operational matters. His men will follow your lead." "Colonel, they don't know me. They don't trust me." "Then make them trust you. You have 6 hours until Volkov closes the net. Use them." The radio went silent. Ilara stood there for a moment, holding the dead radio, feeling the weight of what had just been asked of her. She'd spent 6 years preparing for this moment. 6 years of training, studying, learning to think like the enemy. 6 years of turning her pain into purpose. Now it was time to see if any of it had been worth it. She looked at Dalton. "Captain, I need your map and your full inventory. Weapons, ammunition, explosives, medical supplies, everything." Dalton hesitated for only a second. Then he nodded. "You heard the Colonel. She's running the show." He turned to his team. "Tyler, Garrett, Jenkins, Ramirez, front and center." The 4 men gathered around the map. They looked skeptical, wary, but they were professionals. If their captain said jump, they jumped. Ilara studied each of them in turn, assessing capabilities, reading body language. Tyler, the point man, aggressive, confident, skilled in close quarters. Jenkins, the breacher, methodical, patient, good with demolitions. Ramirez, communications, smart, adaptable, quick thinking. And Garrett, the medic, calm under pressure, observant, the kind of man who saw details others missed. "Okay," she said, her voice taking on a new authority. "Here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to sit in this bunker and wait for Volkov to starve us out. We're not going to try to fight our way through 40 hostiles with the ammunition we have left. And we're not going to run for the extraction point and hope we make it." "So what are we going to do?" Tyler asked, his tone neutral, but his body language defensive. Ilara smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "We're going to turn Volkov's trap into ours. We're going to make him think he's won. And then we're going to kill everyone he sends after us." She pointed to a location on the map, her finger steady and sure. "There's an old Soviet airbase 12 kilometers northeast of our position. Abandoned in the 90s, but the infrastructure is still intact. Hangars, control tower, underground fuel storage. It's the perfect place for Volkov to stage his forces." "How do you know he's there?" Dalton asked. "Because it's what I would do. It's defensible, it has good sight lines, and it's close enough to coordinate a search but far enough to be safe from counterattack. If I'm wrong, we adapt. But I'm not wrong." She traced a route on the map. "Here's what we're going to do. We leave now, use the drainage tunnels that run beneath this entire industrial district. They're not on most maps, but the Soviets built them in the 80s to move supplies during the war. I've studied the schematics. They'll get us within 2 kilometers of the airbase without being spotted." And then, Garrett asked. Then we split up. Captain Reeves takes 3 men and sets up overwatch positions around the airbase perimeter. You establish fields of fire, prepare fallback positions, make sure that when things go loud, Volkov's forces can't reinforce or retreat. What about you? Dalton asked. Ilara's smile widened. I walk in, alone, wounded, desperate, everything Volkov expects to see. I give him exactly what he wants. That's suicide. No, that's bait. And while he's focused on me, while he's savoring his victory, you and your men are going to collapse his entire operation from the outside in. Tyler shook his head. This is insane. You're asking us to let you walk into a hostile compound alone while we sit outside and watch? I'm asking you to trust that I know what I'm doing and to be ready to move fast when the opportunity comes. She looked each of them in the eye, one by one. Volkov has spent 40 years staying alive by being smarter than everyone hunting him. He's paranoid, careful, always 3 steps ahead. But he has one weakness, his ego. He thinks he's already won. He thinks I'm a broken tool sent by a broken man. He's going to want to gloat, to prove he's better than Brennan ever was. And that's when we hit him, Dalton said slowly, beginning to see the shape of her plan. That's when we hit him. Hard, fast, from multiple angles. You cut off his escape routes, eliminate his command and control, create chaos in his ranks. And while he's trying to figure out what's happening, I put a bullet in his head and we all walk out of here. The silence that followed was heavy with doubt and calculation. This wasn't how SEAL teams operated. They trained for years to work as a unit, to trust in proven tactics and overwhelming firepower. What Ilara was proposing was improvisation on a level that bordered on reckless. But it was also the kind of thinking that won impossible fights. Dalton looked at his men. Tyler was skeptical but listening. Jenkins looked intrigued. Ramirez was already mentally working through the communications challenges. And Garrett was watching Ilara with something like respect. All right, Dalton said finally. We do it your way. But if this goes sideways, Ilara interrupted, we'll all be too dead to care about whose fault it was. She turned back to the map, her mind already moving ahead, calculating timelines and contingencies. We move in 30 minutes, travel light, suppress all electronic emissions. Volkov will have drones and possibly signals intelligence. We stay analog, stay quiet, stay invisible. As the team began to prepare, Garrett pulled Ilara aside. You really think this will work? I think it's our best chance, maybe our only chance. And if Volkov doesn't react the way you expect? Ilara touched her wounded shoulder, feeling the fresh bandages, the pain beneath. Then I improvise. It's what I'm good at. You know, most people with 12 scars would have learned to avoid situations like this. Most people with 12 scars are dead. She met his eyes. I'm still here because I learned a long time ago that the only way to survive is to be more dangerous than the things trying to kill you. Garrett handed her something, a small metal coin, worn smooth by handling. His lucky coin. You said you'd bring it back. I'm holding you to that. She took it, feeling the weight of the promise. I will. 30 minutes later, they descended into the drainage tunnels beneath the bunker. The darkness swallowed them whole. And somewhere above, in the ruins of the industrial district, Viktor Volkov's forces continued their methodical search, unaware that their prey had just become the predator. And in Fort Bragg, Colonel Brennan watched his screens and waited for the pieces to fall into place, the way they should have fallen 40 years ago in Beirut. This time, there would be no hesitation. This time, the shot would count. The tunnels were older than the Cold War. They stretched beneath the desert like the arteries of some vast, dead creature, carved by Soviet engineers in the 1980s to move supplies and personnel unseen during the Afghan conflict. The concrete was crumbling now, streaked with mineral deposits and the slow corrosion of 40 years. Water seeped through cracks in the ceiling, pooling in depressions worn smooth by time. The air tasted of earth and rust and forgotten things. Ilara moved through the darkness like she'd been born to it. Her night vision goggles painted the world in shades of green, revealing a landscape of geometric precision, slowly surrendering to entropy. Support pillars every 10 meters, junction boxes on the walls, their wiring long since stripped by scavengers. Faded Cyrillic markings indicating direction and distance, the paint flaking away but still legible if you knew how to read it. And Ilara knew how to read it. Behind her, the SEAL team moved in tactical formation, their weapons at low ready, their footfalls surprisingly quiet despite the weight of their gear. Dalton had put Tyler on point with her, a concession to protocol, even as he'd surrendered tactical command. The point man's skepticism was a palpable thing, radiating from him like heat, but he followed her navigation without question, because so far, every turn she'd called had been correct. "Junction ahead," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the team's internal comms. "3 branches. We take the center tunnel, heading northeast for approximately 800 meters. Then we'll hit a vertical access shaft that should bring us up near the old fuel depot." Tyler's response was terse. "Copy." They moved through the junction, and Ilara felt the familiar weight of command settling across her shoulders. It was a sensation she'd almost forgotten, buried under 6 years of living behind a civilian mask. But down here in the dark, with lives depending on her decisions, the old instincts came roaring back. She'd been a team leader once, in Crimea, before everything went to hell. 7 operators under her command, running deep reconnaissance behind enemy lines. They'd been good, they'd been professional, and they'd died anyway, killed by intelligence that was 6 hours old and an enemy that was 6 steps ahead. She'd been the only one to make it out. The memory tried to surface, tried to drag her back to that frozen forest and the bodies she'd left behind, but she pushed it down with the same iron discipline that had kept her alive this long. There would be time for ghosts later. Right now, she needed to be present, focused, clear-headed. The tunnel began to slope upward. The air changed, becoming less stale, carrying the faint scent of diesel fuel and scorched metal. They were getting close. Ilara raised her fist, signaling a halt. The team froze, becoming statues in the green glow of night vision. She tilted her head, listening. Footsteps. Above them. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. She keyed her mic, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Sentries. At least 3, possibly 4. Patrol patterns suggest they're guarding the access point. Dalton's voice came back, equally quiet. Can we bypass? Negative. This is the only way up for 2 kilometers in either direction. We go through them, or we turn back. A pause. Then, your call. Ilara felt the weight of those words. Your call. The team was deferring to her judgment, trusting her assessment despite barely knowing her. It was a gift and a burden in equal measure. We go silent, she said. Suppressed weapons only. No radio chatter once we commit. Tyler, you're with me. Jenkins, you're rear security. Everyone else holds position until we give the all clear. She didn't wait for confirmation. She moved forward, her movements economical, her breathing controlled. Tyler fell in beside her, his suppressed HK-416 tracking with his eyes. Whatever doubts he had about her capabilities, he was professional enough to keep them locked down when lives were on the line. The vertical shaft was exactly where Ilara had predicted it would be. A concrete cylinder 15 feet in diameter with a rusted ladder bolted to one wall. 40 feet above, she could see the underside of a heavy metal grate, and beyond that, the faint glow of sodium lights and shadows, moving shadows. She holstered her night vision and drew her suppressed Glock 19, the weight familiar in her hand. Tyler positioned himself opposite her, creating a crossfire if things went loud. She pointed up, held up 4 fingers, then made a walking motion with 2 fingers. 4 hostiles, patrol pattern. Tyler nodded. He'd seen them too. Elara began to climb. The ladder was slick with condensation and decades of neglect, but she moved with careful precision, each handhold tested before she committed her weight. Her wounded shoulder screamed with every pull, but she'd learned long ago how to partition pain into a separate room of her mind and lock the door. 20 feet up, 30. The voices above became clearer, speaking in Russian with a regional accent that placed them somewhere in the Caucasus. Wagner Group, probably. Contractors who'd cut their teeth in Ukraine and Syria, men who killed for money and had no illusions about honor or righteousness. Dangerous. Professional. She reached the grate and peered through the gaps in the metal. 4 men, just as she'd predicted. 3 were smoking, their rifles slung casually. The 4th was checking his phone, his attention divided. Amateur mistake. Even contractors got sloppy when they thought they were safe. Elara waited, counting heartbeats, watching their pattern. The 3 smokers moved in a lazy circuit, never straying more than 10 feet from the grate. The one with the phone stood apart, his back to a concrete barrier. Phone guy first. Then the 3 smokers in rapid succession before they could react. She looked down at Tyler, made eye contact through the darkness, and tapped her temple twice. Reading my mind, follow my lead. Tyler's nod was barely visible. Elara took a slow breath, centering herself. The world narrowed to the 4 targets above, their movements already mapped in her mind. She counted down from 5. 5. Her hand closed around the grate's locking mechanism. 4. She calculated the angles, the sequence of shots. 3. Her muscles tensed, ready to explode into action. 2. The phone guy turned slightly, presenting his profile. 1. She lifted the grate with her wounded shoulder, pain lancing through her like electricity, but her gun hand remained steady. The suppressed Glock coughed twice, a double tap to the phone guy's center mass. He folded without a sound, the phone clattering to the concrete. The 3 smokers turned, their reflexes good, but not good enough. Tyler was already through the grate, his rifle tracking. 3 shots in rapid succession, 1 for each target, the suppressed reports no louder than a book being slapped on a table. 3 bodies hitting the ground before they could even raise their weapons. Silence. Elara pulled herself up through the grate, her shoulder protesting every movement, and swept the area with her pistol. Clear. 4 down, no alarm raised. She keyed her mic. Access point secure. Bring the team up. 2 minutes later, all 6 SEALs were on the surface, spread out in a defensive perimeter. They were in what had once been a fuel depot, a sprawling complex of underground tanks and surface pumping stations, now abandoned to rust and scavengers. The sodium lights were newer, running off a portable generator whose distant rumble provided acoustic cover. And beyond the fuel depot, perhaps 800 meters across open ground, the old Soviet airbase rose against the night sky. It was exactly as Elara had described it. 3 massive hangars, their corrugated metal sides pockmarked with bullet holes from decades of fighting. A control tower, still standing despite its broken windows and fire-scarred walls. And surrounding it all, a chain-link fence topped with concertina wire, most of it rusted through, but still a psychological barrier. Lights blazed from the hangars in the tower. Vehicles were parked in neat rows. Technicals with mounted machine guns, armored SUVs, even a BTR-80 personnel carrier. Elara counted at least 30 visible hostiles, moving with the organized purposefulness of a military operation. This wasn't a raiding party, this was a forward operating base. Dalton crawled up beside her, studying the target through his rifle scope. "You were right, he's here." "He's here," Elara confirmed, "and he's expecting me." She pulled out her tablet, calling up a detailed schematic of the airbase that she'd committed to memory months ago. The control tower is the command center. That's where Volkov will be. He'll want high ground, good sight lines, multiple escape routes. It's how he thinks. She traced paths on the screen. "Captain, I need you to position your team here, here, And here, she indicated 3 points that formed a triangle around the base. Overlapping fields of fire, with clear lanes to the primary targets, the vehicle park, the communications antenna on Hangar 2, and the generator farm that's powering everything. What's the timeline? I give you 30 minutes to get into position. At exactly 0300 hours, I walk in through the main gate. That gives you time to identify priorities, range your targets, and prepare for the signal. What signal? Ilara's smile was cold. You'll know it when you see it. When it happens, you light them up. Vehicles first to prevent reinforcement or escape, then communications. Then you start working through their personnel, focusing on anyone trying to organize a defense. Garrett spoke up from his position behind a rusted fuel tank. And you'll be in the middle of all that? I'll be in the tower with Volkov. By the time you start shooting, I'll either have him secured or I'll be dead. Either way, your job is to make sure nobody else leaves that base alive. The brutality of the statement hung in the air. This wasn't about capture or arrest. This was about elimination. Total, absolute, final. Tyler finally voiced what they were all thinking. This is an assassination op. Yes, Ilara said simply. It is. Volkov has spent 40 years killing people, destabilizing governments, and profiting from misery. He's a cancer. And tonight, we're the cure. She looked at each of them in turn. I understand if that's a problem. I understand if that crosses lines you're not comfortable crossing. But this is what the mission always was. Everything else, the extraction, the cover story, that was just window dressing. Colonel Brennan and I have been building toward this moment for 6 years, and now it's here. Dalton's jaw worked, his mind processing the implications. They were SEALs, they followed orders, but those orders typically came through proper channels, with oversight and accountability. What Ilara was describing was something else, a personal vendetta wrapped in the flag of justice. But he'd also seen the satellite feeds. He'd seen the bodies Volkov's people left behind. He'd read the classified reports about bombings and assassinations and atrocities that could be traced back to this one man. Sometimes cancer needed to be cut out, and sometimes the scalpel needed to cut deep. All right, Dalton said, we do it your way. But if you're not out of that tower within 10 minutes of first contact, we're coming in after you. Fair enough, Ilara checked her watch. It's 02:30 now. You have 30 minutes to get into position. Use the time wisely. The team began to move, splitting into their assigned elements. Dalton took Tyler and Jenkins north. Garrett and Ramirez moved south. Each pair would establish overwatch positions with interlocking fields of fire, turning the airbase into a kill box. Before Garrett left, he paused beside Ilara. That coin I gave you, you still have it? She pulled it from her pocket, showing him. Good, because I want it back, which means you need to come back. I'll do my best, Doc. Your best better be good enough. He hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I don't think you're crazy. I think you're the sanest person here. The rest of us are just following orders. You're fighting for something that matters. Before she could respond, he was gone, melting into the shadows with Ramirez. Ilara was alone. She stayed in position for another 20 minutes, watching the airbase, studying the patterns. Guard rotations every 15 minutes, sentries moving in pairs. A command post set up in the tower's second floor, visible through the broken windows. Maps, computers, armed men moving with purpose. And standing at the window, backlit by the interior lights, a lean figure with a scar running from eye to jaw. Viktor Volkov. Even at this distance, even after 40 years and 1,000 close calls, he moved with the confidence of someone who'd never truly been beaten. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, like a man surveying property he owned. Ilara felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. This was the man who'd killed Marcus Davis, the man who'd taken Brennan's leg, the man who'd made a career out of violence and walked away rich while better people bled out in gutters. Tonight, his luck ran out. At exactly 0300, she stood and began walking toward the main gate. She'd stripped off her tactical gear, leaving her in just torn fatigues and a bloodied shirt. Her wounded shoulder was visible, the bandages soaked through. She walked with a limp, favoring her left side, her hands empty and visible. Her hair was disheveled, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. She looked exactly like what Volkov would expect to see, a broken operator at the end of her rope, with nowhere left to run. The sentries at the gate saw her coming from 100 meters out. She watched them tense, rifles coming up, voices calling out in Russian. She raised her hands, palms out, and kept walking. "I'm unarmed," she called out in flawless Russian. "I'm injured. I need to speak to Volkov." The sentries exchanged glances. One keyed his radio, speaking rapidly. A moment later, the gate swung open, and 4 men rushed out, weapons trained on her. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Ilara complied, moving slowly, wincing as the physician pulled at her shoulder. Rough hands grabbed her, searching for weapons, for electronics, for anything that could pose a threat. They found nothing. She'd made sure of that. "She's clean," one of the guards reported. "Bring her to the tower. He wants to see her." They hauled her to her feet, 2 men gripping her arms, half dragging her across the tarmac toward the control tower. Ilara let her head hang, let them think she was at the breaking point. But her eyes were active, cataloging everything. Vehicle positions, guard rotations, weapon placements, the location of the generator farm, the communications antenna. Every detail fed into the tactical map in her mind. They pulled her into the tower and up 2 flights of stairs, past more guards, past rooms filled with equipment and ammunition. Finally, they reached the second-floor command post, and there waiting for her was Viktor Volkov. He was older than his photographs, the scar tissue on his face more pronounced, but his eyes were young, sharp, predatory. He wore civilian clothes, dark slacks, a button-down shirt, but carried himself with military bearing. "Miss Cross," he said in English, his accent thick but his pronunciation precise. "Or should I call you by your real name, the one Brennan gave you when he recruited you?" Ilara said nothing. She was breathing hard, partially from exertion, partially from calculated performance. Volkov circled her slowly, studying her like a specimen. "You know, I've been looking forward to this meeting. Brennan has been hunting me for 40 years. 40 years! And in all that time, he never came close. He was always too slow, too cautious, too afraid of making another mistake." He stopped in front of her. "But then he found you. A broken toy, someone damaged enough to be useful. And he thought he could train you to do what he couldn't." "He did train me," Ilara said quietly. Volkov laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "And yet here you are, bleeding, captured, alone, some weapon you turned out to be." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I'm going to ask you questions. You're going to answer them. And if you lie, or if you refuse, I'm going to hurt you in ways that will make you beg for death. Do you understand?" Ilara held his gaze. "I understand." "Good. Let's start with something simple. Where is your team?" "Dead. Killed in the ambush at the refinery." "Lie." His hand moved faster than expected, striking her across the face. Pain exploded through her jaw, and she tasted blood. "Try again." "Scattered. Last I saw them, they were pinned down in the industrial district. I broke off, tried to make it to the extraction point alone. Didn't work out." Volkov studied her, looking for tells, for inconsistencies. "How did you find out I was here?" "Communications intercept. We've been tracking your signal patterns for months." "Who's running you? Just Brennan, or is there a whole team?" "Just Brennan. This was personal for him. He didn't want CIA oversight." "How long have you been operational?" 6 years, since Brennan found me." The questions continued, each one probing deeper, testing the cover stories she and Brennan had constructed over years of preparation. Ilara answered with just enough truth to be believable, just enough lies to protect what mattered. And all the while, her internal clock was counting down. 3 minutes since she entered the tower. Dalton's team would be in position now, ranging their targets. 5 minutes. They'd have identified priority threats, calculated wind speed and bullet drop. 7 minutes. Final checks on equipment, controlled breathing, fingers resting lightly on triggers. Volkov was still talking, his voice growing more confident. You know what I think? I think Brennan sent you here to die. I think he's so obsessed with revenge that he sacrificed his own protege just for a chance at getting to me. And the beautiful irony is that it won't work. He's sitting in his wheelchair half a world away while you bleed out in front of me. You're wrong, Ilara said. Am I? Yes, because Brennan didn't send me here to kill you. He sent me here to prove something. Volkov's eyes narrowed. Prove what? That I'm better than he ever was. In one fluid motion, Ilara's hands shot out, grabbing a coffee mug from the desk beside her and smashing it into the face of the nearest guard. Ceramics shattered. The guard screamed. She was already moving, ducking under Volkov's reaching hands, driving her elbow into his solar plexus. He folded, gasping for air, and she grabbed his sidearm from its holster. A Makarov, old but functional. She put 2 rounds into the first guard's chest, then pivoted and shot the second guard through the throat. Volkov was recovering, his hand reaching for a backup weapon. But Ilara was faster. She kicked his knee, hyperextending the joint, and he went down with a howl of pain. She pressed the Makarov against his temple. Don't move, she said quietly. Then she walked to the window, the gun still trained on Volkov, and fired 3 shots into the air. The signal. A heartbeat of silence. Then the night exploded. From 3 positions around the airbase perimeter, the SEALs opened fire with devastating precision. Tyler's M110 sniper rifle barked first, the heavy 7.62 millimeter rounds punching through the BTR's engine block and fuel tank. The vehicle erupted in a ball of orange flame that turned night into day. Dalton and Jenkins followed a split second later, their suppressed weapons coughing death into the vehicle park. Tires shredded, windshields imploded, fuel tanks ruptured and ignited. Garrett and Ramirez hit the communications antenna, their concentrated fire toppling the structure in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The base's radio net went dead, and then they began working through personnel targets. It was surgical, methodical. Every shot counted. Guards rushing to respond were cut down before they could reach their weapons. Officers trying to organize a defense were eliminated first. Anyone who looked like they might pose a threat died within seconds of being identified. The airbase descended into chaos. Men ran in every direction, some toward the fighting, most away from it. Orders were shouted and ignored. Weapons were fired blindly into the darkness, hitting nothing but air. The SEALs were invisible, their muzzle flashes hidden by suppressors and careful positioning. They were ghosts, and they were reaping. In the tower, Volkov stared at Ilara with something like comprehension dawning in his eyes. Brennan planned this. All of it. You were the bait. I was the weapon, Ilara corrected. The bait was the airbase itself. You thought you were setting a trap, but you walked into one instead. She could hear boots pounding up the stairs, reinforcements coming. She had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the second floor. Volkov seemed to realize this too. His hand moved toward an ankle holster, slow and careful. Don't, Ilara said. Or what? You'll shoot me? Then all of this was for nothing. Brennan wants me alive to answer for Beirut. Brennan wanted you dead. That's all he ever wanted. But he taught me something important. Revenge is just another mission. And missions have objectives, timelines, success criteria. The objective was your death. The timeline was tonight. The success criteria was me walking out of here alive. She pulled the trigger. The Makarov's report was deafening in the enclosed space. The round caught Volkov in the center of his chest, punching through sternum and spine and exiting out his back in a spray of red. He looked down at the wound, surprise etched across his scarred face. His mouth worked, trying to form words, but only blood came out. Then he fell backward, hitting the floor with a sound like a bag of wet cement. Viktor Volkov, the ghost who'd haunted 2 generations of operators, was dead. Ilara didn't wait to confirm the kill. She was already moving, grabbing a dead guard's AK-74 and a spare magazine. The boots on the stairs were closer now, voices shouting in Russian. She positioned herself beside the door, weapon ready, breathing controlled. The first man through took 2 rounds to the face. The second caught a 3-round burst to the chest. The third started to retreat, but Ilara was faster, stepping into the doorway and dropping him with a headshot. The stairs fell silent. She moved down carefully, clearing each landing, her shoulders screaming, but her hands steady. On the ground floor, she emerged into a scene from hell. The airbase was burning, bodies littered the tarmac. The remaining hostiles had barricaded themselves in Hangar 1, returning fire at ghosts they couldn't see. Ilara keyed the radio she'd taken from one of the guards, switching to the SEAL team's frequency. Actual, this is Cross. Primary objective complete. Volkov is KIA. I'm exiting the tower, moving to your position. Dalton's voice came back, calm despite the chaos. Copy that. We have you on thermal. Proceed to Rally Point Alpha. We'll provide cover. She ran. Her wounded shoulder had gone numb, adrenaline masking the damage. Her lungs burned. Her legs felt like lead. But she ran anyway, because stopping meant dying. Rounds kicked up dust around her feet. A bullet cracked past her ear, so close she felt the pressure wave. But the SEALs were watching, and anyone who drew a bead on her died before they could complete the trigger pull. She reached the perimeter fence and dove through a gap Tyler had cut in the wire. Hands grabbed her, hauling her into cover. Garrett's face appeared above her, his expression fierce. You good? I'm alive. Good enough. He began checking her vitals, while around them, the firefight continued. But it was winding down now, the resistance collapsing as the SEALs systematically eliminated every remaining threat. 10 minutes after Ilara's signal, the shooting stopped. The airbase was silent except for the crackle of flames and the settling of wreckage. 37 hostiles had been on site when the operation began. 37 bodies now cooled on the tarmac or burned inside vehicles. But not 0 friendly casualties. Ramirez lay behind a concrete barrier, his body still, his eyes staring at nothing. A lucky shot from a guard they hadn't spotted had caught him in the gap between his vest plates. He died instantly, according to Garrett, who'd reached him first. The only casualty, the only man who didn't make it home. Dalton moved through the carnage with practiced efficiency, confirming kills, collecting intelligence, documenting the scene. This would be someone's problem eventually. The diplomatic fallout, the investigations, the official denials. But that was above his pay grade. He found Ilara sitting against a concrete barrier, Garrett working on her shoulder with fresh bandages. She looked exhausted, hollow, like someone who'd just run a marathon through hell. Volkov? Dalton asked. Dead, center mass, through the heart. He's in the tower, 2nd floor. You sure? I'm sure. Dalton keyed his radio. Ironside, this is actual. Objective complete. Repeat, objective complete. Primary target is KIA. The response was immediate. Copy that, actual. Extraction is inbound. You have birds in the air, ETA 15 minutes. Get to the rally point. Roger, moving now. The team collapsed their perimeter and began the movement to extraction. They traveled light, leaving the bodies in the burning base behind. They carried Ramirez with them, wrapped in a poncho liner, his body given the dignity his death had earned. In 15 minutes, 2 Black Hawks appeared out of the darkness, their rotors beating the air into submission. The SEALs loaded quickly, professionally, each man finding his seat and strapping in. Ramirez's body was secured with quiet reverence. Ilara was last aboard, Garrett helping her into the troop bay. As the helicopter lifted off, she looked down at the airbase one last time. Smoke rose in columns, visible for miles. The tower was a black silhouette against the flames. And somewhere in that wreckage, Viktor Volkov's body was growing cold. His 40-year run finally at an end. She felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no relief. Just the hollow emptiness that came after violence. The space where emotion should be, but wasn't. Garrett squeezed her good shoulder. "You did it." "Yeah," she said quietly. "I did it." The helicopters banked hard, turning toward friendly airspace, leaving the burning base and its dead behind. The mission was over. But for Ilara, something else was just beginning. The helicopters touched down at the forward operating base just as dawn broke over the desert. Exhausted men stumbled out, their faces etched with the kind of weariness that sleep couldn't cure. The adrenaline had drained away during the flight, leaving behind the heavy weight of what they'd done and what it had cost. Ilara found Garrett near the medical tent, supervising the unloading of supplies. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the worn coin, holding it out to him. "Told you I'd bring it back," she said quietly. Garrett stared at the coin for a long moment, then closed her hand around it. "Keep it. You earned it more than I ever did." "Doc." "I mean it," his eyes held hers. "You brought all of us home. Well, almost all of us." His gaze drifted toward where Ramirez's body bag was being loaded onto a separate bird. "That coin's supposed to bring luck. Maybe it worked, just not for everyone." Ilara looked down at the coin, feeling its weight differently now. Not a borrowed talisman, but a reminder, another ghost to carry. "Thank you, Garrett." He nodded once, then turned back to his work, leaving her standing there with the coin pressed against her palm and the morning sun turning the desert gold. 3 months later, the sky over Arlington National Cemetery was the color of polished steel. Ilara stood in her dress uniform, shoulders back, spine straight, despite the ache that still lived in her left shoulder. The uniform was new. She'd only officially been read back into service 2 weeks ago, the paperwork retroactive, making her civilian contractor status a convenient fiction that could be maintained or discarded as needed. The medals on her chest were not new. Some dated back years, to operations that officially never happened. Others were recent, including a Bronze Star with Valor for actions in Syria. She didn't feel like she'd earned any of them. Beside her, Colonel Brennan sat in his wheelchair, his own dress uniform immaculate. He'd said nothing during the ceremony, just watched as Carlos Ramirez was laid to rest with full military honors. The ceremony concluded. The flag was folded and presented to Ramirez's widow. Taps played across the cemetery, that mournful call echoing among the white headstones. Then it was over, and people began to disperse, returning to lives that would continue without him. Brennan rolled his wheelchair closer to Ilara. "Walk with me." They moved through the cemetery in silence, passing row after row of identical white markers. Each one a life, a story, a debt paid. Brennan stopped at one marker in particular, his hand reaching out to touch the cold stone. Marcus Davis, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, Beirut, Lebanon, 1984. "I come here every year," Brennan said quietly. "On the anniversary of his death, I tell him about my life, about the world he's missing, about the people I've trained, the missions I've run, and I apologize for the shot I didn't take." Ilara said nothing. There was nothing to say. "For 40 years, Brennan continued, I've been telling myself that if I could just kill Volkov, it would mean something. It would balance the scales. Davis's death would have purpose." He looked up at Ilara. "But now Volkov's dead. The mission is complete. And I don't feel any different. Davis is still gone. My leg is still gone. 40 years of hunting didn't bring any of it back." "Then why did we do it?" Alara asked. Because some debts have to be paid, even if paying them doesn't heal the wound. Because men like Volkov don't get to walk away clean while better men die in the dirt. Because, he paused, choosing his words carefully, because you needed a reason to keep living. And I needed to believe that all this pain could be turned into something useful. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. I have something for you. Inside was a metal bird, carved from a spent rifle casing, identical to the one she carried in her pocket. I made this for Davis, Brennan said, after his first confirmed kill. Told him every hunter needs a totem. He carried it until the day he died. After Beirut, I kept it. Couldn't bring myself to let it go. He pressed the box into Alara's hand. Now I'm giving it to you, because you finished what Davis and I started. You took the shot we couldn't take. You were everything I trained you to be. Alara looked at the two birds, one old and worn from Garrett's coin pocket, one new and perfect from Davis's legacy. Two totems, two ghosts to carry forward. What happens now? She asked. Now you decide who you want to be. The mission is over. Volkov is dead. You don't owe me anything anymore. You can walk away, build a life, try to be normal. Or you can keep doing this. There are other Volkovs out there, other ghosts that need hunting. The work never stops. Alara thought about the tunnels beneath Syria, the burning airbase, Ramirez's body being loaded onto the helicopter, the weight of the metals on her chest. She thought about Garrett's words in the bunker. You're fighting for something that matters. I'm not built for normal, she said finally. I tried that, it didn't take. Brennan smiled, and it was sad and proud in equal measure. Then welcome back to the war, Corporal, or should I say, Lieutenant. Your promotion came through yesterday. 6 months later, snow fell on the mountains of Montana in thick, silent curtains. Alara sat by the window of a small cabin, watching the white landscape transform into something pristine and untouched. A fire crackled in the hearth behind her. Coffee steamed in a mug cradled between her hands. On the table beside her lay 3 objects. The first was Garrett's lucky coin, worn smooth by years of handling in pockets not her own. The second was a metal bird carved from a spent rifle casing, Davis's totem, now hers. A gift from a dead man through the hands of the living. The third was a thin black folder, unmarked except for a classification stamp that made it technically illegal for her to have outside a secure facility. She'd opened it 3 times in the last week. Each time she'd read the contents, memorized the target profile, studied the operational parameters. Each time she'd closed it and set it aside, telling herself she needed more time to decide. But the truth was, the decision had already been made. Probably made months ago in that Syrian bunker. Maybe made 6 years ago when Brennan had found her bleeding out and offered her a purpose. The folder contained a new mission, a new target, a new ghost to hunt. Alara picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Colonel Brennan? It's Cross, sir. I've read the brief. And? I'm in. When do we start? There was a pause, and she could almost see him in his office at Fort Bragg, surrounded by maps and files and the accumulated weight of 40 years of service. There's a flight leaving Bozeman tomorrow at 0600. Be on it. Yes, sir. Alara, his voice softened slightly. You don't have to do this. You've earned the right to rest. With respect, sir, I don't think I know how to rest anymore. I know. I never learned either, but I had to offer. Understood. I'll see you tomorrow. She ended the call and set the phone down. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white. Beautiful, peaceful, temporary. Beneath the snow, the ground was still hard and frozen. But spring would come, as it always did. Life would claw its way back to the surface. The cycle would continue. Alara picked up the black folder, feeling its weight. Inside were photographs, dossiers, intelligence assessments, another ghost, another debt to be paid. She thought about Garrett, now back with his team, carrying the memories of Syria like stones in his pockets. About Ramirez's widow, raising 2 children alone. About Brennan, still fighting his wars from a wheelchair. About Davis, who'd been dead for 40 years, but somehow still present in every decision she made. The ghosts never really left. You just learned to carry them. She opened the folder one more time, studying the target's face, committing it to memory, beginning the process of learning how they thought, how they moved, where they were vulnerable. The hunt was beginning again. Ilara Cross stood and walked to the window, her reflection visible in the dark glass. The medals were gone, locked away in a drawer. The uniform hung in a closet. What remained was something harder to define, a weapon that looked like a woman, or a woman who'd learned to be a weapon. She touched her shoulder where the newest scar was still healing. Number 13, she thought. The coin, the bird, and now this. Lucky 13. Outside, the snow fell heavier, and the mountains stood silent and eternal, keeping their secrets. The war was never over. It just changed theaters. And Ilara Cross was no longer running from it. She was walking straight toward the next battle, eyes open, scars counted, ready. The huntress had found her purpose, and the snow would eventually stop falling.